Welcome back to the deep dive. You've sent us a really compelling stack of sources, articles, research notes, all pointing towards, well, one of the most fascinating executive powers, the presidential pardon.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating and often controversial. We're diving into the history, the sort of legal edges, and the big questions around it.
Right. And our goal is to unpack what your sources tell us about how it works, where it came from, and the controversies, especially through this recent case involving a former Virginia sheriff.
Okay, yeah, let's start there. Scott Jenkins, former sheriff of Culpeper County. The sources you shared detail his conviction late last year, December 2024. Federal charges.
What were they exactly?
Conspiracy, honest services fraud, and bribery. It all centered on this alleged cash for badges scheme.
Right, cash for badges. The sources say he took over $75,000 in bribes.
That's the figure mentioned. And a key part, over $35,000 apparently came from Rick Rohim, who was a convicted felon.
Wow. And Raheem testified he was paying for
Oh,
help getting his gun rights back?
that was his testimony, yeah. Paying the sheriff for help with restoring gun rights after a felony conviction.
Okay. So Jenkins gets convicted, sentenced to 10 years.
Correct. And then this is where it gets directly relevant to the pardon power. Jenkins publicly appealed to President Trump.
Saying what? That Trump would help if he knew the story?
Basically, yeah. Expressed that belief. And, well, President Trump did respond.
How did he frame it? I saw quotes calling Jenkins a victim.
A victim, yes, and blaming an overzealous or weaponized Biden DOJ. Then he granted the pardon.
That sequence really forces you to look at the pardon power itself, doesn't it? Where does this kind of authority even come from? Seems almost royal.
It does, and you're right on track. Its roots are in the English monarch's prerogative of mercy. That idea heavily influenced the U.S. Constitution.
So the founders debated this.
Oh, yeah. They considered different options, like needing Senate approval, but ultimately decided to vest the power solely in the president.
And Hamilton argued strongly for that, didn't he? I think your sources quote Federalist Number 74. Something about the power shouldn't be fettered or embarrassed.
Exactly. The benign prerogative of pardoning should be as little as possible fettered or embarrassed. His argument was basically that one person could act decisively, maybe with more compassion, than a group.
But it does have limits.
It does. Crucially, it's only for federal crimes, state crimes, civil cases, impeachment. Those are off limits. But it can be granted any time, even before someone's convicted.
Okay, which brings us back to the Jenkins case and the bribery allegations. Can a pardon be invalid if it was obtained through fraud or bribery?
That's a really tricky legal question. Sources point to old common law ideas like, no one should be a judge in their own case.
Like Old English law.
Yeah, there were even procedures like something called sire facies, ways to challenge official grants if they were obtained improperly.
So even way back, they worried about self-dealing. But how does that apply today? Can you actually challenge a presidential pardon in court based on how it was obtained?
It's tough. While English law might hesitate to question the king's motives, U.S. law sees bribery for a pardon differently as defrauding the public, essentially.
Okay, defrauding the public. So while maybe the pardon itself stands, could there be other consequences?
That's where some legal arguments go. The act of bribing someone for a pardon is obviously a crime. And some scholars argue a president could potentially face prosecution after leaving office if they use pardons corruptly, say, to obstruct justice, even if the pardon itself remains valid.
And your sources mention other controversial pardons too, right? Often tied to political connections, maybe donations.
Yeah, names like Mark Rich come up, some Iran-Contra figures, Dinesh D'Souza, Ted Sewell. These raise the crony pardon question. Is it okay to pardon associates?
It's such a contrast, though, because the same power historically has been used for what seems like public good.
Absolutely. Think Washington after the Whiskey Rebellion or the post-Civil War amnesties, even Carter pardoning Vietnam draft resistors. Those were aimed at national healing,
So there is a formal process, right? Through the Department of Justice, the pardon attorney.
There is an established process with investigation recommendations, but here's the catch. Those DOJ regulations are purely advisory. The president doesn't have to follow them.
So ultimately, it's the president's call, full stop. Can Congress do anything?
They can't limit the power itself substantively. They can't say who the president can or can't pardon, but they can conduct oversight, hold hearings, maybe pass laws about transparency, like requiring disclosure about who lobbied for a pardon.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly broad power rooted deep in history, sometimes used for mercy or healing, but also wide open to controversy, especially when politics or money seem involved.
Exactly. It really highlights this fundamental tension that comes through in the sources you shared.
Yeah.
Balancing this huge executive power, maybe intended for the public good, against the need for accountability and the rule of law, especially when questions about motive or quid pro quo arise.
Definitely something for you, the listener, to mull over as you dig into these sources yourself. How do we navigate that tension?